Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of the Lineup Lab. It has been a while. Football season is basically over and we're just basically left with Daily Fantasy NBA, which is exactly what I want to talk about in this video. Now, I'm not going to get into the basic strategy of projecting players, projecting minutes, trying to pick the right players and try to pick the right plays. If you're new to NBA and you want a head start on that, I would suggest starting with a projection system like ones that are offered on FantasyLabs or DailyFantasyWinners. I think they do a pretty good job. But what I'm going to focus on today is just lineup construction and how to construct a lineup that's going to maximize the correlations in your lineup and increase that upside that we want to get in hopes of winning a big GPP like this FanDuel Tuesday NBA Slam. So how we're going to go into correlations is we're going to use some really cool stats from stats.nba, which I'll get to in a sec, to find these correlations. So first what we're going to do is we're just going to find a value play to build around. And so I'm going to start by just looking at the bargain players. Actually, I actually really like this tool on FantasyLabs, and I think it's free. It just shows who the bargain plays compared, and bargain meaning compared to DraftKings prices. So some people might have good prices on both and they're not going to show up high on this, but that doesn't mean they're not a good bargain. However, I think this is a really great tool because it just shows you, okay, who are guys who are just really well priced. So let's just browse this for a second. Oh, I see a guy who I like, Doug McDermott. So if we look at this matchup page on FantasyLabs, you can see this is the Bulls starting lineup for tomorrow because Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade are out. So we have Michael Carter-Williams, and then we have Jerian Grant and Doug McDermott who are replacing Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade. Really great values here. So Doug McDermott is probably going to be someone who's a pretty popular play tomorrow, and for good reason. I think he's great value, starting small forward. He's a good scorer. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at stats.nba, and we're going to try to figure out who he might have correlations with, or is he a good guy to pair with other players on his team. So I really love these stats. If you go to just stats.nba, you go to players, general, and you go to scoring, you'll go onto this page and you can filter by team. I'm going to filter by the Chicago Bulls. And they have a stat that's called field goal made assisted and field goals made unassisted. So this stat is obviously pretty straightforward. It's just the percentage of the field goals that this player makes that either comes from an assist or it's just comes on its own, like the person is creating his own shot. If you look right here, and obviously you've never seen these stats before, so you're not sure what is good or what is bad, but you can see that Doug McDermott is basically at the top of the Bulls team. He has 87% of his field goals are assisted. So what this means is that he's going to be a guy who's going to work really well with the point guard or someone who gets assists on their team, someone like maybe Michael Carter-Williams, who is the starting point guard. So Doug McDermott is probably going to be a guy who's going to be used a lot on FanDuel. And instead of just going like, okay, this player is going to be used a lot, let me pivot to another person and fade him, you do another thing where you can just say, okay, I'm just going to leverage this play and play players that are correlated with them in order to differentiate myself and raise that upside of my lineup from the field. So maybe you say, okay, I'm going to play Michael Carter-Williams. I'm going to bank off him getting assists and McDermott getting points. And then maybe we can look at one more. Taj Gibson has 70% field goals made assisted. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And so maybe we could put him into the lineup as well. And obviously with Chicago thin, he probably is a pretty solid play as well. So this might be the beginnings of a pretty good lineup that has some good correlations. So let's just see another example of this. Sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes players are not high assisted field goals. So let's try to find someone like that. And looking around a little bit, we can see Jeremy Lamb has a 99 bargain rating, and it makes sense. He is filling in for the injured Nick Batum, and they still really haven't adjusted his salary for someone who's going to start and get the minutes that he's getting. As you can see, he had 28 fantasy points last game starting. So he's obviously a very strong play. Now, so let's look for Charlotte here. And let's see, advanced filters. Let's do that, and we're going to say Charlotte Hornets. And let's look at field goal made assisted. So where's Jeremy Lamb? Oh, you are way down there. So Jeremy Lamb's only 43% assisted, percent field goals made assisted. So what that means is he's actually not going to be correlated with a guy like Kemba Walker, who gets a lot of points from his assists, as you can see if we look at his game logs. So he's someone that you actually might not want to pair with Walker, despite the fact he's really good value. Now maybe his value just outweighs this. But I probably am going to try to not pair him with Lamb, because Lamb is a guy who doesn't get assists himself, so he's not going to be correlated with anyone on the team in that way. And he scores a lot that he's just creating his own shot. Most of his points are 57% of his field goals made are just going to be shots that he creates on his own. So he's not really correlated with anyone on the team, so we really don't want to use him with a guy like Kemba Walker, who needs a big game assist-wise in order to have a big game. So one thing you can do is, if you want to go the fade route and instead not play Jeremy Lamb, what you can do is you say, okay, well, I'm going to play Kemba Walker, leverage him having a big game, and then play some players that are correlated with him. So look, Marvin Williams, 86% field goal made assisted. He seems like a great guy to play with Kemba. And then Cody Zeller as well, 78% field goal made assisted. He seems like another great guy. So again, we have a nice correlation play here with Kemba, Marvin Williams, and Cody Zeller. A guy who's going to get high assists and two guys who are going to benefit from those assists. And we're going to pivot off of Jeremy Lamb in this way. So that's just another way you can use this chart over here to interpret it and sort of make a lineup that's a little more thoughtful than probably a lot of people are putting into their lineups. They're just sort of picking all their best value plays and not really actually thinking about this at all. Now, last thing is, one play I think is going to be really popular tomorrow or today when you're watching this video is James Harden. Because there are really just a ton of value plays today or tonight, and he's at home. He can just afford them, and there's just not many other big salary guys to go to besides him. LeBron is at Utah. Durant is at home, but against Miami, he's kind of a slow team. DeMarcus Cousins is expensive, and Detroit isn't a juicy matchup. So I think Harden is going to be used quite a bit. And NBA is kind of different than other sports. I always say in baseball, if someone's going to be really highly owned, I would say just fading them, because even guys like Mike Trout, they can go 0 for 4 in a given matchup. But NBA is a little different because the standard deviations are not as big, and there's just not that much variation in how someone's going to perform. If you look at his game log, he did actually have a pretty big stinker at Orlando where he had like 33 fantasy points. But aside from that, he basically has ranged from 45 to 60 fantasy points in almost all the games, and has had some big ones in between. So he's a guy who's just going to get you some good fantasy points, and I just don't really think he's a fade in the spot. I think he's a very obvious play, and he's a play that you should make. So instead of just fading him or trying to get really cute and pivot off him or try to make a really contrarian lineup construction, I think another cool thing you can do is just use the StatSet NBA data and look for guys that he's going to be correlated with, because again, he's a very high assist guy. He's a triple-double threat. So let's look. You have a guy like Trevor Ariza, who's 85% field goal made assisted. It's a pretty good deal. Montrezl Harrell, who's been coming on strong, is a solid fantasy play. 81.5% assisted field goals. So these are a couple guys who really are high assisted field goals guys. You can actually pair them with Harden, which I don't think either of these guys will be that popular of plays. You pair these two with Harden, suddenly you have a lineup that's more correlated with Harden than other lineups who are just going to pick a lot of random guys around him. You're going to raise your upside a bit, and you might make a better lineup construction here by doing something like this, especially with Harrell, who I think is certainly a good play, especially if he starts. I know they've kind of been alternating with the name, but this guy seems like a pretty good player, and obviously is still a little too cheap at 5,300. So that's just one way I use stats.nba data in order to make a better lineup. I think there's a couple more things that I'm going to get into in later videos, one being offensive rebounds and how they're actually reverse a reverse correlation and what to do with that. So anyway, it's just a little trick I use for lineup construction, and I really hope you try and implement this in your lineups today, and tweet me, tell me what you think. I hope you really enjoyed this, and look for more of them to come later. Thanks.